Well, hello and welcome. My name is Michelle Yasuda, and I'm the program director for the Big Leap Home online programs, which are part of the Foundation for Conscious Living. And these programs support individuals, organizations, and communities in generating agency, connection, and creativity on our shared planet. And I just love that intention. And this call that you're on tonight is one of the ways that we express this and do this. So I have just a couple of logistics to go over, and then I'm going to turn this call over to our magnificent facilitator. I want to first invite you to join our Hendricks community on the Mighty Networks. This is an online gathering space for us to connect with each other. You'll hear about the latest events and seminars. And also, we post tools and practices, Hendricks tools and practices that you can add into your daily life. And if you want to expand your aliveness in magnificent ways. So let's see. I want to just lastly let you know about some seminars we have coming up. We have a lot on happening in our community. So Evolutionary Playground, our foundational course, starts the first week in February. In March, we have our Body Intelligence Advanced Training and an in-person couples course, which is a rare event. And also, we're launching a brand new year-long course called Cultivating New Stories for Humanity. I don't know about you, but I think it's time for that. So now I'd like to turn our attention to the amazing Gay Hendricks, but in the tradition of the Big Leap Bridge calls, I want to appreciate you, Gay, for tonight. I was thinking about you and thinking about this, and I was thinking that something I appreciate so much about you is your amazing ability to be incredibly spacious and grounded at the same time. And that is a magical combination. And so I'm going to turn the call over to you and thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. And thank you, Michelle, for being a beacon of enlightenment and goodness wherever you turn your attention. And I'm glad it's our way. So, welcome. It's my honor and privilege to take a little time tonight to talk about one of my very favorite subject of breathing, and especially how you can use it to make your life better, more balanced, more effective, even. And so we're going to be doing some experiential activities tonight, as well as doing some head stuff about it. Hello, Dean. I was trying to figure out how long I've been interested in breathing. And I mean, interested in it as a clinical tool. And oh, by the way, I just turned 80 this week on Monday. And so subtracting 1968 from 80, never mind. Anyway, a long time, 50, 60 years, I've been interested in breathing. My very first experience was I was working with juvenile delinquents at the time, and there was this big black kid named Gary who was from the inner city of Boston, and really a great kid. He just made some mistakes, and but when I was practicing, doing my practicum at the master's level at the University of New Hampshire, I worked with him about a particular issue, and it was snake phobia. And I grew up in Florida, and anybody that learns to walk in Florida has snake phobia. But beyond that, this kid really had it in the sense that his mother would have to go through magazines and cut out pictures of snakes. So what I noticed with this kid was that when I would even start to get near the subject of snake, his breathing would change. He would hold his breath he would clench it down. And I realized I didn't even know anything about breathing at the time, but I just noticed that he kind of went into this whole body clench around snakes. And here's the interesting thing: he'd never actually seen a snake in real life. I mean, this kid was from concrete, basketball. He didn't know snakes in real life, but somehow this had gotten into his head. I don't know how. And um, but the key thing is the breath observation. That was the first time I can remember uh, actually having a thought about breathing. And as I helped him learn how to breathe, first by putting a hand on a magazine and going through all the stuff of that for 20 minutes, and then having him put a picture, a hand on a picture of a snake. And anyway, took about 6 weeks to get him to the point where we could go to the actual zoo and see a snake. But the whole time, his breathing was telling me exactly what was going on with him. And I didn't even know it at the time. I didn't have a language for it. The second thing, I want to take you through my evolution. The second thing was when I was a PhD student at Stanford, they had the reigning biofeedback expert come and go back. This is 1971. Okay, so 50 some years ago, 53 years ago. There was about 3 biofeedback machines in the country, and Stanford, of course, being a rich university, had bought one, and they cost about $20,000, and none of us knew how to operate it. And so they brought the guy in from the inventor, and he showed us how to do it. And he had learned a breathing, or not a breathing activity, a relaxation activity, where you go clench, release, and you go through different muscle groups doing that. So he took us through that. It took us about 20 minutes. And then he had the biofeedback machine going. And the biofeedback machine in those days was about the size of a refrigerator. Now you can get one on this. But that would have been a miracle machine. That would have been a Dick Tracy machine 51 years ago. But here's this big old machine. And the guy pointed out that when people get to a certain degree of relaxation, their breathing changes and usually goes down to maybe 8 cycles a minute. Anxious breathing, about 15 times a minute. Steady state breathing, maybe 11 or 12 times a minute. So I stuck up my hand like a brash young college student and I said, hey, since the breathing is down to about 8 cycles per minute, let's just skip over the biofeedback machine. Let's teach people how to breathe at 8 cycles a minute. Exploding head of the professor, he did not like this idea at all. Oh no, you have to. But I decided to try that out for myself. I started doing it a little bit with some clients. I started just teaching them how to breathe slower and deeper. And it's not as easy as it sounds, actually, because you have to go through whatever the person's resistance is. And if they didn't have resistance, they wouldn't have skewed breathing in the first place. Okay, so that was the second time I began to really suspect the power of breathing. But it wasn't until 1974 that I had the giant breakthrough that led to me writing the book, Learning to Love Yourself, became a big bestseller and kind of put me on the map in a sense. And it was also written the same year I met Katie. But before that, in 1974, I'd had this experience, life-changing experience of realizing that even though I had a PhD and I was ready to start teaching university classes, I didn't know anything from my heart. I couldn't say to a person in 10 seconds, here's what you need to do, if that situation came up. And I didn't know what that was for myself. And I felt it very acutely because I was about to start teaching graduate students the field of counseling and clinical psychology. And So I'm out in the woods and I decide to, and this was just before my classes started, the week before. I was walking around, I rented a cabin and I was walking around in the woods and I realized all my life I'd look for the answer outside myself. What if I asked the inside of myself as if I were a good standing member of the universe, not different from anything else, just find out what the secret was here. And so I decided to do that. And standing out in the woods, I said, what is the one thing I need to know? Or what is the one thing I'm doing wrong that keeps me from growing? But what is the one thing I need to know that will always keep me growing in the proper direction? And nothing happened. I just stood there. And then this thing happened where I got this energy rush all the way up. It felt like it emanated from the earth and went all the way up my body and was such that it was so strong. I remember kind of staggering around trying to feel it all. And it left a message behind. The message was get beneath your concepts and feel the actual emotion you're feeling, feel the energy distortion wherever it is. It doesn't have to be an emotion, but feel it before you try to talk yourself out of it. And that was a genuine new starting point for me, where instead of going away from things in the direction of my mind, I began to include my body and my sensations as that, as the place I got energy from. And before that, I'd been highly intellectual and good at it and knew the answers to all the test questions. But what I didn't have was that inner sense of deep self. And so I started doing that right there under the trees. I began to simply go out and walk around and let myself feel what I was feeling. And you know what? As I began to do that, I felt delicious, as you will, when you begin to feel those sensations streaming up your body. I could feel the sensation of fear, anger, sadness, all of the sensations. And I could feel this thing that I call now just pure life energy. It was just the energy of life moving through me. And it left a message behind that it was good to feel it, but what was really good was to love it, to use the greatest human capacity we had come across so far, love, to affect your own inner state. And so I realized as I began to love my fear, love my sadness, love my anger, that I would expand to embrace them and I would integrate the energy of them. So anger would no longer be bunched up in my shoulders. It would be an energy I could just feel moving through me. And then I could choose to say, I'm angry or not, if the situation were appropriate to it. And so I I'm guessing I spent about 45 minutes just reeling around under the trees because I noticed that my breathing shifted. The more I let myself experience myself as I was, my breathing expanded so that it was coming in sort of in great gusts rather than sipping through a straw. It was just coming through me as if I were my breath. And by the way, I should point out at this point that I had had no chemical alterations in my system except a cup of decaf coffee. I was even off coffee at the time. So this was natural. Uh, so as I began to breathe more, I felt more. As I felt more, I breathed deeper. And so it was to a point where everything disappeared in a sense that was no difference between me and my emotion and the sky above. It was a moment of unity come through going this way into myself rather than up, rather than deep. I'm sorry, rather than up toward heaven, I went down into my body to find the answers. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 50 some years in one variety or another. I've been either writing books about that or showing people how to do that. The thing we're talking about tonight has to do with breathing and how breathing can be channeled to affect a greater sense of well-being in you or heal things if such things need to be healed. So back to the subject of breathing. Thank you for listening to a couple of my personal experiences. I just personally, I always like to know where an idea comes from rather than just having it come out of nowhere. I want to complete the story by telling you that the following day, I got a chance to put my freshly learned principle um, to the test. I got a call. Oh, by the way, I should tell you that I was the new guy in a department at the university where there was a couple of people in the counseling department, a couple of people in the such and such. Anyway, under the psychology umbrella in the School of Education, there was maybe 100 people. So I'd been to a faculty gathering where they presented the new guys, and there was maybe half a dozen of us. And I spent the whole evening shaking hands and exchanging names and, um, having faculty wives come up to me and so forth. So I got a call from a woman now passed on named Fran, and she said, I met you at the party the other night. I said, oh, okay. And so I said, what can I do for you? And she said that she'd gotten my number from the school secretary um, because I'd also met her husband. And she said she's going through an anxiety attack and what we now call probably a panic attack. She was really feeling it. And so she asked me, could she come over to this little cabin that I'd rented? And I said, sure. And so she drove over and she sat down and she told me that her husband, or she had just learned that her husband had a kind of a long-term affair with a graduate student going. And it had shaken her world, because she had the two kids and they were both in scouts and she was the scout mother. And, she was doing the whole motherhood thing up to the max. It was her world. And suddenly to find that world shaken, she was going through a classic panic attack. And so as she was sitting there in the chair, she kind of looked like this. And so based on this experience I had yesterday, or the day before yesterday, seems like yesterday, I said to her, instead of trying to what I'd done maybe the day before, or 2 days before, I would have had her slow down her breathing or maybe breathe a little bit into a paper bag where she could exchange her CO2 and, get centered a little bit that way. Instead, I went the opposite direction and it changed both of our lives. I said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it more. And she kind of popped her eyes open. Whoa, what do you mean? And I said, that fear you're feeling, the way you're breathing, just let yourself go with it. And she closed her eyes and went from kind of having the brakes on to, just really breathing and moving. And I'd never seen anything like that in my life. I really hadn't. I tried to keep my cool, very clinically detached, but I was secretly inside, gee, look what I've unleashed. But I had this inner confidence of the day before, which had been, I had really felt the value of acceptance, of love, rather than pushing something at a distance or trying to filter it through my mind. So it was a huge learning. And you know what? After about 15 minutes, I sat with her and she just kept breathing and I kept encouraging her and it began to slow down. And she, after I would guess about 15 minutes, she kind of popped open her eyes and said, what was that? And I said, I sort of, Mr. Stanford, I was trying to be very detached and funny. I said, that's one of those things that happens when you go deeply into something. But meanwhile, my inner cheerleader was saying, wow, look what happened by just letting a person go with what they were doing and feeling rather than trying to cramp it or stamp it or put it down in any way or lessen it. So it was a huge moment for me of going in there myself and doing that. And it was a huge moment for me in watching how my breathing changes but it was a monster moment for me in watching somebody else change their lives right in front of me. The happy ending of the story is I did something else bold that I used to do a lot, and I used to enjoy the heck out of it because nobody else did at the moment. Um, but she said, I've decided I want to tell my husband this, what she'd just done, what she'd done with her fear, and to say, I'd rather you didn't do this. Okay. And that was what came to her as a thing to do. And so um, I pointed the phone and I said, would you like me to call him? Because there's a difference between wanting to do something and being opportunity to do it now. And so I punched him out. Hey, Barry. Oops. He just died also, so I'm not going to worry about that. But I said, hey, Professor, I got your wife here, and I just did a kind of a gratis session with her about some stuff she was feeling, and she'd like to tell you about it. So she gets on the phone with him for about 5 minutes and gets to the point of saying, I'd rather you didn't do this. And she got off the phone, and I said, well, what did he say? And you know what he said? Okay, undramatically. Okay. And it made me wonder how many times, if we simply ask for something, it might make a difference. So I learned a lot from that key moment. But again, I want to give all glory to the breathing and to the trusting of a natural process and the using of a natural process. Remember the kid from the inner city of Boston? I just a little inkling, that was interesting. He kind of held his breath a little bit. It was just the fleetingest thought, but it was a connection point between mind and body for me. And I'll always treasure. I often wonder if we could push a button and say whatever happened to, I know he's not on Facebook, but find out where he is. I'm going to pause there for a moment. And I would like to do a little purposeful activity with you. Sound okay? I can't hear you say no, so I'm going to proceed. This is a massive roar of yeses from the audience. So I'd like you to get yourself as comfortable as you can to sit and breathe for about 5 or 10 minutes. And that means get your back away. Don't lean back on something because that impinges your breathing. So get your back flexible and your neck flexible because I'm going to invite you to do something different with your spine. So go ahead, if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, sit with your eyes comfortably closed and just feel yourself as a body rather than a mind or as two eyes. Think of yourself as a whole being. I'd like you to play with something that took at least 4 or 5 million years of evolution to get it right, but maybe a lot longer than that. But we have fossil evidence for 4 or 5 million years anyway. But go with your, if you've done our yes breath, do the yes breath. But if you haven't, just move your spine the way I'm going to move my spine. So rock your pelvis front to back, and then let your head tilt up slightly when it rocks toward the front. Ideally, you should feel movement all the way up and down your spine. And if you're like most of us, it should creak a little bit at first. Once you begin to have your mind on it, it gets probably a little freer as you get the juices moving there. Now put a little breath behind that. By when you rock your pelvis forward, take a nice round little belly breath that makes your belly round. And then when you breathe out, rock toward the back and tilt your head down slightly. So breathing in, tilt up to accommodate the breath. breathing out. Hmm. I want you to experience kind of a dramatic version of what goes on in people's bodies when they experience a trauma. So lock your chin and your neck down against here and try to breathe against that at the same time you're resisting your breath from here. Okay, shake that off. Didn't feel good, did it? No, because you're fighting against nature. And nature out in the wild, what happens is that when the threat goes away, the animal goes back to normal. By the way, this goes throughout mammalhood. By the way, my cat over here, Allie, is taking a nap right now. And I can watch her doing her own little tiny miniature version of this while she sleeps. So it's not just us that have this thing that's happening in us all the time, but it's us who can resist that thing. How many people do you see going around? You don't know what's wrong with them, but it's for damn sure they're not feeling the flow of life energy in themselves as they move down the street. I call your attention to one of my great life heroes, Satchel Paige, one of the great pitchers of all time. He pitched a couple of innings in the majors when he was 67 years old. And he didn't even get into the white guys league until he was 47 years old, because back then they had segregation. Satchel Paige said several things, but one thing he says, as you walk, jangle lightly. And look him up on YouTube sometime and just watch the way he pitched or watch the way he moved around. You can see he's jangling lightly as he moves around. He had several other proverbs too, and I'm trying to remember. One of them was, don't eat fried food. It angers up the blood. Said he who just had some fish and chips for lunch today. But in my defense, I took some of the breaded stuff off some of the fish. So I take pride in that. So I wanted you to get a feel of what organic nature feels like when it's moving through you correctly, because I noticed way back 50 years ago when I was a graduate student, I used to go over and look in the neonatal wards through the windows and stuff and watch people's breathing. Once I'd gotten onto this breathing thing, I became obsessed with it. And I would notice that on the wall of every neonatal ward in the world is the little chart of what distressed infant breathing looks like. And, you could even see with very, very little people where their breathing was disturbed. And Dr. Viola Fryman did a study of 1,250 people in the first couple of years of their life. And she found that there was residual birth trauma in about 750 of the 1,250 that she worked on when they were 2 years old or so. I had the pleasure of spending a day in her clinic with her in San Diego. She was 90, I think, at the time. She was a cantankerous but really amazing woman. But she practiced for something like 70 years straight. She didn't believe in taking a day off or anything like that. She was really a force of nature. But she worked pretty much exclusively with the breathing and the movement of the cerebrospinal fluid. Those are two things she focused on. She didn't want to hear anything else. And at the time I knew her, she had quit working with older people. She was working only with children. the day I worked with her, she was working with a 12-year-old for a long time. And if I'd been working with her, I worked with her with about her feelings and her emerging sexuality, which would have been a very valid way to go. Well, Fryman didn't want to hear any of that. She wanted to look at how the spine was moving and these things that she could spot. And, then she began to work them out. So that's a valid way to go too. Bless her heart. Back to breathing. If you go on YouTube sometime and look yourself up an amoeba through the 50,000x microscope, you'll see the Mr. or Ms. amoeba is basically doing one thing all the time. They're going like this or like this. They're expanding or they're contracting. They're expanding or they're contracting. They're expanding or they're contracting. As you can see in the background, I'm breathing along with that because we're really complicated amoebas, but we're still doing the basic thing of expanding and contracting all the time. And if you look carefully at where the contraction or the expansion glitches, you can learn very quickly a lot about the person. And the easiest place to see the glitches, in my opinion, is in the breathing. Because once it'll take you 5 or 6 weeks to really learn to watch people's breathing. But once you do, it's like, remember the day you learned to read where that jumble of letters certainly meant something, that's kind of how I feel about if you begin to focus on your breathing more and more and focus on your client's breathing if you work with people. We're going through a very dry spell here in California, by the way. We're having our 276, I read today, our 276 straight day without any rain. So I'm staying hydrated as best I can. All right, so let's get back to the subject of what can you do with your awareness now of this subject? Well, one thing you can do is when you see people contracting, facilitate the contraction, but offer the expansion. What I'm saying is the contraction, don't argue with it, facilitate it. Help the person, if the person is holding their breath, say, could you hold your breath a little bit more? So it raises their awareness one tiny bit. And that's all you need. That's all you need is one tiny degree of awareness. And the person goes from person clenching their jaw to person aware that they're clenching their jaw. And those are two different life periods that open up when you begin to see the world that way. So look for gaps in the breathing. Look for little hitches and glitches in the expansion or the contraction. I want to focus in on the contraction for a moment because I worked a lot with asthmatics. I used to work, by the way, the university I worked for, the Graduate Center of University of Colorado is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Beautiful place to live, by the way. And I was there for 21 years. And they also, while I was there, built the Olympic Training Center there. And wow, did I learn a lot about superior athletes. And one thing that I want to mention that I learned about them is how many of them have asthma. That, like a bicyclist that runs around that track where you're riding your bike basically sideways. I forget what they call that, but here was a guy who was one of the best people in the world at doing that, and he has asthma. And what had happened was, and I found this to be true in several other people that I worked with, swimmers, bicyclists, those are the two that come to mind right now. How many of them built their athletic ability on top of the asthma? In other words, while they were running, they didn't experience the asthma. They were running, they were out in front. In fact, one guy actually, he stays 2 steps out in front of his asthma when he goes to jog. And that's why it feels so good. Sad to say also, many of those folks were sponsored by pharmaceutical companies, and particularly one that makes a particularly strong medicine that people with asthma take to get things going again. And I've heard more than one person tell me that for the 15 minutes, this particular medicine is called prednisone, and for the 15 minutes when that's hitting you, you feel like you're the king of the universe. And so everything is working just right. And you know what's happening is you're getting walloped by a steroid, and you can't do that every day. And your body will begin to react. But I want to place emphasis on the subject of expansion and contraction. Expansion and contraction. Look for expansion and look for contraction. And the two should not be interrupted. In other words, I'm not saying expand, contract, expand, contract. It's a flow. They melt into each other. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because so many people that you work with hold their breath at the top. In other words, instead of letting the in breath roll over into the out breath, that's the way nature's designed it. Nature doesn't have any sharp edges and stopping places and that kind of thing. You don't see your heart when you're looking at it through a video of it. You don't see your heart saying, bump. Well, I wonder if I'm going to go bump. Well, I wonder if I'm going to go bump. No, it's working all the time. And so that's the way your breathing is trying to work too. But when you're in your fight or flight reflex, you snatch your breath at the top. And that little snatch is wired into your body in such a way that adrenaline moves through your body. Adrenaline is one of the strongest things there is known to humanity and human adrenaline. And so it just takes a minute, tiny micromillimeter of that to really get you going. And so we keep reinforcing ourselves and reinvigorating ourselves and re-inoculating ourselves with things that produce adrenaline reactions in our body. And the problem with adrenaline is it's designed by nature to only last for a couple of minutes. You're not designed to stay adrenalized off and on through the day, as we have started to do in modern society. In the old days, and when I say old days, I'm talking 50,000 years ago, when a tiger came out of the underbrush and ran at you, you threw some rocks at that tiger and used your anxiety to run like heck. So you fought and you fled. And if you were good at it, you got to pass down your genes. If you weren't good at it, bye-bye. So we are descended from ancestors millions of years who have been breathing and registering certain things with our breath. When we see a tiger, no one is going to advise you to just keep breathing normally. We want you to snatch a quick breath. We want you to grab some adrenaline and throw some rocks and run like hell. What we don't want anymore, though, is for us to be firing off that adrenaline all day long at work. And people do. They get angry at something at 8:45 and their still muscles are tight at 11:45. You don't see animals doing that. I watch my cats. They get very upset when another cat walks through the backyard. Oh, as soon as the cat goes, they go back to sleep again. And it's beautiful to watch because they're doing what we're supposed to be doing. When the threat disappears, the body calms down. I want to pay a special mention of breathing and eating. One problem that people have in modern society, and we've had it for a long time, I remember my grandfather was talking about it, was people arguing and fighting while they were trying to eat, arguing with each other while they were trying to eat, talking about negative stuff while they were trying to eat. Human bodies are not designed to do that. Human bodies are designed to eat, digest, 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 excrete, get energy from, move on for another day. What happens in modern society, though, is that, I went back to cave people again. Okay, so they have a certain cycle, but what if a tiger comes out of the woods and chases them back into the cave? Tiger won't go in the cave because there's a fire in there. And so eventually the tiger goes off and looks for something else to eat. And what's happened there is that we don't want to flatten out or resist a system that's taken 50 million years to perfect. What we want to do is ask it for its wisdom. So I want from this day forth for you to begin a conversation with your feelings that's just like a conversation with your best friend. So I want you to say, hey, anger, what triggers you? You should have a conversation with your sadness too. Hey, sadness, what is it that I'm feeling I've lost? How many losses have I had? And then I want you to say, belly, fear. What am I scared of? What am I really afraid of? And have conversations. Shame, same thing with shame, same thing with your sexuality. I want you to have conversations with all of those inner feelings because here's an interesting thing. If you look physiologically, like what runs your sexual energy? It's not little Maud in the next third grade classroom. She's not where it comes from. It comes from an energy center in you that's buried deep in your pelvis that begins to fire up in a certain way at puberty. I remember, in fact, I remember sitting on a fence when I was a kid, when I was about 10 years old. And I hadn't had puberty yet. And I was talking to this friend of mine who was 12, and he was trying to explain to me how sex worked and where children came from. And he was talking about males putting their penises into females and things like that. And I remember I wasn't having any of it. I said, you know how I know you're BSing me? And he said, how? And I said, neither my mother or my grandmother would ever put up with a thing like that. That was my assessment of them at the time based on what I had seen. I didn't have a father, so I didn't ever see my mother relating to another man. And then I saw my grandparents. As my mother put it, they were married 63 years, but they spent 59 and a half of those years not speaking to each other. So they were always in World War IV. And but it's a good training ground for a therapist because I learned early on to leave the room when things vibrationally felt like they were heading in the wrong direction. And if you haven't learned that skill yet, get on it quickly. Okay, I'm going to pause from my utterances here, and I'm going to open the floor and see if anybody has questions or things they need more clarity on here before we wind up tonight.
All right. Yeah, please raise your electronic hand. And I saw Kim had a question. She said, are you saying the glitch in the breath at its peak is the first step in our bodies realizing the fight flight and then adrenaline kicks on? Is that what you were saying?
Pretty much that it doesn't have to be just at the top, but you will see it in fight or flight. Like you can even see that they have these studies and you can look them up, where they did something like make a loud noise behind somebody that was all wired up. And you see them, it's just amazing. They do the exact opposite of the yes breath. In other words, they stop breathing, they stick out their chin way up like this and lock up their pelvis. And you can see it plain as day. I hated that study. The first one they did was they shot off a shotgun behind a guy while he was all wired up. Whoever came up with that study ought to be in jail. It gives our field a really bad name, like the ones that Stanley Milgram did. Okay,
All right.
let's go on.
All right. You want another question? We have Leslie here. I'll go ahead and bring her up with you.
Hey, Gay, thank you. I've really enjoyed being with you tonight.
Thank you.
Great, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Where's your stuff? I don't have any stuff here from you.
So, could you guide me a little bit of when I'm feeling anxiety come up, I've dealt with it for a long time. And,
Yes.
if I go lie down and take a complete break, I'll calm down after a while, but sometimes I'm in the middle of making a decision, or I'm in the middle of a conversation, or, I need to write it out.
Yeah.
I,
Well, that's exactly what I want you to do. Instead of lying down, that's a last ditch kind of thing. But the key thing is breathe into it. Breathe down the middle of it. Feel it and breathe through the middle of it. Let it expand. Let it expand. If possible, if it gets intense, go for a walk. Burn it. Burn it. I contacted my fear for the first time. Gosh, it was back in the 70s sometime. And I remember it unleashed so much in me. I walked for about 5 miles just trying to stay in my body, basically.
and do you recommend, um, if I can, a little of the yes movement? And is it in the nose, out the mouth, and just really deep?
Forget the mouth, use the nose.
Both nose, in and out?
Yeah, I don't know where this thing got started about breathing through the mouth. There is nothing in nature that breathes through its mouth. I should say there's nothing in nature that has a nose that prefers mouth breathing to that.
Okay.
Our noses have evolved from millions of years to have little things dancing in them that catch particles. And if you go like this, boy, I'll tell you, that's good for about 10 seconds, but don't do it much longer than that, because there's no filter system in here. You're taking stuff directly in.
And the yes movement, is that even more beneficial?
If you can possibly do that, great. That's the best thing you can do.
And what time frame are you talking? A minute or two? I mean, it depends. You talked about going 5 miles, but where can you get a turnaround? What's kind of a minimal amount where you can get a turnaround?
About 60 breaths. If you're breathing 10 times a minute, that would be 5 or 6 minutes, right?
Could you repeat, because you cut out a little bit, please?
I said 60, 60 breaths.
Okay, great. And fairly slow.
Yeah, if they're anxiety 15 a minute, 4-second breaths, those are not going to help you. You can do that all day long and you're not going to be feeling any better.
So I'm sorry to ask you to repeat it, but did you say 15-second breaths?
15 times a minute, 4-second breaths.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, in, out, out, in, out, out. That's how fast people breathe when they're anxious.
And
I've
so
counted them more than once.
you're recommending instead to do what?
If possible, get your breathing under 10 times a minute. If possible, 8 times a minute is really good. 7 or 8 times a minute.
So that's about,
Your body cannot produce stress chemistry when you're breathing that slow.
so
It
that
won't do it.
sounds like about 7 to 8 seconds per in and out, or kind of a,
Well, 6 times a minute is a 10-second round trip.
mm-hmm,
6 of those, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out.
great.
The most relaxed person I've ever known did 5 breaths a minute. Oh, but that was after like about 2 years of biofeedback training, you know. Her professor used to parade her around the conferences and demonstrate her breathing and everything.
Well, it feels really great to have such specific information from a master, so thank you.
Well, thank you. It's very rare that I get to talk about this subject in these kind of ways, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
All right, we have Lisa. You want to take in one more question?
Hi, Gay. Great to see you. I've been rereading your book, Radiance, and here you are tonight. This is wonderful.
Here I am, radiant even.
The author. And so are you still using radiance as a term for that wonderful technique where you feel more and more capacity?
I actually quit using that word. It's a beautiful word, except nobody ever knew what I was talking about. They thought it was talking about being radioactive or something. And so I kind of phased it out because to explain and have people feel what radiance really is, you know, it'd take you an hour to kind of get that feeling established in people. And so I had to, unfortunately, kind of leave it behind. We call it different things over the years. Now I don't like to call it, I call it the yes breath, but I want everybody to breathe like that. I want it to be, see, everybody's already trying to breathe like that. We just need to participate with it and let it teach us. Let it teach us rather than us teach it, because it will teach us just like it taught me out in the forest that day. It has a message to it.
It has been teaching me, and I think that those words of streaming that you use and the vibration and ripples, it's really communicating. And
Good.
so I've been enjoying using the term radiance.
Good. We'll continue to use it. Your type of person sounds like you're already a radiant person, so you know how to talk about it, but hardly anybody else did.
Well, thank you. I've been having fun with it. I'm really glad to get your encouragement to use it. It's
Somebody
great
has
to see.
manifested over your left shoulder there and disappeared. Are you
Well,
calling forth a shadow element of yourself, or was that a real person?
this is my real person, my conscious love.
Hi, Gay.
Hi.
I remember going out and bike riding with you out in Ojai one time about, I don't know, 12, 14 years ago, something like that.
Oh,
Right
wow,
before we
wow.
got married.
Yeah.
Really fantastic. Well, congratulations. Well, I'm off my bike right now because of this whole broken leg. I've been dealing with this broken leg and 4 surgeries over the past year. I've been really dealing with the medical side of things, but I love my bike.
Boy, me too.
And happy birthday.
Good to see you, Gay.
Thank you. Good to
Really
see you
good to
too.
see you.
I'm going to need to go here pretty soon because I have other places I want to breathe tonight. And if you haven't learned everything you need to know about breathing, take one of our trainings, do some more of it. It's all there. It's written in the flesh. The instructions for how to get outside the box are inside the box. So go down in there and get those instructions.
Thank you so much, Gay. So appreciate you. if everybody wants to unmute and say goodbye,
Thank you. Thank you
feel
so much.
free. Yeah.
Wonderful. Good to see you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Blessings.
Love you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.